He said I was old and dead to him. Those were the exact words that shattered 20 years of my life into ash. Stay with me till the end, because what happened after that one sentence changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and myself. That night started like any other. I had just come home from a client's house, tired but happy. I'd spent hours helping a young couple choose paint colors for their new living room. Dorian was already home, sitting in the living room with his laptop open and a glass of whiskey half empty beside him. The moment I walked in, I felt it, the coldness in the air. "Dinner's in the oven," I said softly, hanging my coat. He didn't even look up. His eyes were glued to the screen, his fingers tapping fast. "Again," he muttered. "You used to actually cook fresh food, Amira." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "It is fresh, Dorian. I just put it in a bit earlier." He sighed loudly, like my words were an inconvenience. "You don't try anymore. Not with the house, not with me, not with yourself." That last part stung. I looked at him carefully. The man I once adored was right there in front of me, but his face was different. Harder. Colder. The warmth that used to live in his eyes had vanished months ago, replaced with a kind of restless irritation. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked straight at me for the first time that night. "It means you're not the same woman I married. You've aged. You've lost your spark." He paused, his lip curling in disgust. "You're old and dead to me." The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt them sink deep into my chest, heavier with every second. My throat burned, but no tears came. It was as if my body went numb all at once. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to ask him how he could say that to the woman who stood by him through every storm, who worked late nights just to help him start his company. But instead, I stood still, frozen silent. He turned back to his laptop, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the room. The fire in the fireplace cracked softly, breaking the silence. I looked at the flames dancing across the logs and felt something stir inside me, something I couldn't name yet. I sat down on the couch across from him, staring into the fire. The light flickered against the glass, reflecting back at me like tiny golden ghosts. For the first time in 20 years, I didn't see the home we built together. I saw ashes. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of something much darker. For days after that night, I tried to push his words out of my mind. Maybe he didn't mean it, I told myself. Maybe he was just tired, angry, or drunk. 20 years of love couldn't just vanish because of a few cruel words, right? But the silence that filled our house told me otherwise. Dorian barely spoke to me. When he did, it was short, clipped sentences. He started coming home later and later, always with the same excuse: meetings, clients, networking dinners. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the good wife who trusted her husband. But deep down, a small voice kept whispering that something wasn't right. Sometimes, I'd sit alone at the dining table, looking at the empty chair across from me, remembering who we used to be. When we met, he was still in grad school, a dreamer with nothing but plans and charm. I was the one with a stable job, working long hours at a small design firm. He'd bring me coffee during my lunch breaks and talk about how one day he'd build houses, big, beautiful ones that families could call home. I believed in him so much that I mortgaged my late mother's house to help him start his first project. I can still remember signing those papers, my hands trembling, but my heart full of pride. When his business finally took off, we celebrated with cheap champagne and leftover pizza on the floor of our first tiny apartment. He kissed my forehead and said, "I'll never forget what you did for me, Amira." Now, it felt like he already had. One evening, after another long night waiting for him, I decided to take his car to run some errands. As I reached for my purse, something caught my eye on the back seat, a silk scarf, pale gold with tiny embroidered flowers. It looked expensive, the kind of thing I never wore. I picked it up and brought it close to my face. The scent was soft but sharp, jasmine and vanilla. Not my perfume. Not anything I owned. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the scarf in my hands. My heart started to race, my throat tightening. I wanted to believe it was just a client's or a co-worker's, maybe left behind accidentally. But I knew better. Dorian's late nights suddenly made perfect, painful sense. That night, when he came home past midnight, I didn't say a word. I smiled, asked if he wanted tea, and kissed him on the cheek. He looked surprised but said nothing. I watched him walk upstairs, pretending not to notice the faint trace of that same jasmine scent clinging to his jacket. I went to bed beside him, my eyes open in the dark. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. That Friday, I told Dorian I had a late client meeting. He didn't even question it. He just nodded, adjusting his tie, saying he'd be working late too. His casual tone made my stomach twist. Something in me already knew where this night was headed. After he left, I waited 15 minutes before grabbing my keys and slipping into my car. My hands trembled as I followed him through the streets of Atlanta, the city lights blurring through my windshield. He drove toward Buckhead, the part of town where we used to go for anniversaries and birthdays, back when we still celebrated anything. He parked outside a restaurant I knew too well, the same one where he once got down on one knee and promised me forever. I parked a little farther away, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. Then I saw her. She stepped out of a silver Mercedes in a tight black dress that shimmered under the streetlight. Zuri Nash. I recognized her from social media, a young property broker who had recently started working with his company. I remembered Dorian mentioning her name once, saying she was sharp and driven. Now I could see what he really meant. She was beautiful, glowing with the kind of youth and energy I could never compete with. Dorian greeted her with a smile I hadn't seen in years. Not the polite smile he gave me these days. This one reached his eyes. He touched her lower back gently as they walked toward the entrance. And before they went inside, he leaned in and kissed her. That single moment cracked something inside me. But it didn't break me. I sat there for almost 2 hours, watching them through the restaurant window, laughing and touching hands across the table like two people in love. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched, memorizing every detail, every lie that had finally taken shape. When he dropped her off later that night, I followed them quietly. They kissed again before she disappeared into her apartment building. Dorian sat in his car for a while, smiling to himself. That smile burned into my memory. When I finally drove home, I felt strangely calm. Cold, even. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and started collecting things: bank statements, credit card receipts, copies of business registrations. And there it was. The house we built together wasn't in our names anymore. Dorian had quietly transferred it to his company's ownership months ago. My chest tightened, but I didn't panic. Instead, I took a deep breath and began saving every piece of evidence I could find: screenshots, documents, pictures. He thought I was too trusting, too emotional to notice what he was doing. But he forgot who helped build him from the ground up. And this time, I was going to make sure every lie, every secret, would cost him everything. I moved through our house like a practiced actor. Smile when he walked in, ask about his day, laugh at the right moments. At events I praised his work and clapped like a proud partner. Everyone saw the perfect wife. No one saw the plans I was making. By day I met clients and picked fabrics with steady hands. By night I emptied the safe, slipped cash into envelopes, and opened a private account he wouldn't know. I packed my mother's brooches and my grandmother's prayer beads and left them with Naomi. She hid them without asking. I left the house often, meetings, errands, coffee, each trip with a purpose. Dorian hardly noticed. He charmed investors, ate late dinners, and kept his distance at home. I kept records, emails, receipts, odd late-night charges. I cataloged them with the same care I once gave to swatches, methodical and calm. My voice stayed soft while my hands did the work. The night he insulted me in front of friends felt like a test. We hosted his partners and neighbors. Conversation flitted from deals to youth and stamina. Dorian leaned back and said loud enough for all to hear, "Amira's getting old. She's slowing down." A few laughed. He added a cruel joke about my body. I smiled, raised my glass, and said, "To new chapters." Inside, something finished shifting. The sting folded into a cold clarity. I could have confronted him. I could have stormed out. Instead, I observed faces, reactions, the way his eyes flicked when someone agreed. After guests left, the house smelled like coffee and lemon. He kissed my cheek and went to his study. I stood still and felt the weight of what I had already done. The transfers were complete. The heirlooms were safe. The secret account held more than I thought possible. My calm was no longer an act. It became preparation. Lying awake that night, I made sharper choices. The quiet I kept had teeth. I was no longer waiting for him to remember me. I was arranging the pieces of my life, so if he tried to erase me, he would find there was nothing left to take. And if he crossed the line again, I was ready to respond in a way he would never see coming. Naomi's messages steadied me. Everything's safe. Her calm anchored me. I copied insurance papers, tax forms, and the deed, then hid a flash drive inside an old cookbook. I tracked Dorian's public movements, flights, dinners, who traveled with him. I rehearsed short replies to nosy questions and practiced a pleasant smile until it felt real. Friends asked if I was okay. I said yes to avoid pity. Only Naomi knew about the boxed heirlooms. The work I did was practical and slow. Document, secure, and prepare an exit with dignity intact. The envelope came on a Tuesday morning, plain and heavy, marked with his lawyer's name. I thought it was some business document he'd forgotten to mention. But when I opened it, the words hit me like a fist. Petition for divorce. Filed by Dorian Baines. My name printed beneath his, like a stranger's. He had listed irreconcilable differences as the reason, and under notes, he'd claimed I was emotionally unstable. I read that line over and over, trying to understand how the man I built my life around could twist the truth so easily. My hands shook, but no tears came. Somewhere deep down, I had expected this. I just hadn't expected him to make it so cruel. By the time evening came, news had already spread through our social circle. I knew because the smiles people gave me had changed, polite, forced, the kind that hide whispers. And then there was Zuri. Suddenly she appeared everywhere. At luncheons, charity meetings, even the same art events I used to attend with Dorian. She wore the same confidence I once had, the same designer colors, even the same brand of perfume. People began to treat her like she was the new Mrs. Baines. She didn't correct them. She smiled, held Dorian's arm, and looked at me with a hint of triumph. I learned to hold my face steady. Never let her see the break beneath the surface. That weekend, I went to a charity gala out of habit, still clinging to a fragment of the life I once lived. The ballroom sparkled with lights, violins played softly, and laughter floated through the air. I almost managed to pretend everything was fine. But then I saw them. Dorian stood across the room with Zuri, his hand resting on her waist, his head tilted close as she whispered something that made him laugh. That same deep, easy laugh that used to belong to me. Cameras flashed. People looked. Someone whispered my name. I felt heat rise to my face, but I didn't say a word. I simply turned, set my glass down, and walked out. My heels clicked against the marble floor like punctuation marks, sharp and final. No one followed me. When I reached home, the silence felt heavy. I took off my jewelry, one piece at a time, and began walking through the house. My hands ran over the walls I had painted myself, the kitchen island we argued over, the bed I had picked with love. Each thing in that house had a story, and now all of them belonged to someone else. I stopped in front of the fireplace and stared into the empty grate. The house felt like a shell, beautiful but hollow, lifeless. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but behind the exhaustion was something else. A quiet understanding. Everything I had given had turned into ghosts. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning of what needed to end. The morning after the gala, I woke up with a strange stillness inside me. No tears, no shaking, no more sleepless panic. Just a deep, cold calm that felt heavier than grief. I made coffee, dressed neatly, and called a divorce lawyer. If Dorian wanted to play this game, I needed to understand the rules first. The lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Ellen, listened carefully as I explained everything. The house, the company, the years I'd worked to build our life. She pulled up public records, typed a few things, then sighed. "Mrs. Baines," she said gently, "it looks like your husband transferred the property deed to his company last year. Legally, it's not in your name anymore." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What does that mean?" "It means if he moves forward with this divorce, you may walk away with very little," she said. "Most of what you built together now falls under business assets, not marital ones. He's been planning this." I stared at the papers she slid across the desk, signatures, stamps, numbers. Proof of how carefully he had used my trust to erase me. All those late nights at his office, all those excuses, they had been steps in his plan. My stomach turned, but my voice stayed even. "So, if he wants everything," I said slowly, "I just have to make sure there's nothing left to take." Ellen looked at me sharply. "Mrs. Baines, I'm here to help you legally." "Of course," I replied with a polite smile. "Legally." When I left her office, the sun was too bright. The city moved around me, cars honking, people talking, life going on, while inside something new began to grow. It wasn't rage exactly. It was clarity. That night, I opened the safe again. My movements were slow, deliberate. I took out the insurance documents, home, life, valuables, and tucked them into a plain folder. I scanned and copied everything, storing digital files on a drive I hid inside an old vase. Then I went to the kitchen drawer and picked up the spare house key. I drove to a locksmith downtown, smiled faintly, and asked for duplicates. "Just a backup," I said when he looked curious. He handed them to me within minutes, unaware that he was part of a larger story forming piece by piece. When I returned home, Dorian was asleep. His phone buzzed beside him. Zuri's name flashed on the screen. I watched it for a long moment, unreadable. Then I turned off the light and walked out of the room quietly. My reflection in the hallway mirror didn't look broken anymore. My face was calm, almost serene. Every trace of emotion had been ironed out, replaced by something harder, sharper. I wasn't planning to beg or fight for scraps. I was planning to end this on my own terms. They left Friday morning before sunrise, kissing under the streetlight like they were in a movie. Dorian waved, suitcase in hand, and Zuri laughed at something he said. They drove off toward the airport, leaving the house quiet and heavy in their wake. I watched them go from the hallway window, feeling nothing at first, only a flat, steady calm. Their trip gave me the time I needed. I told Naomi I was visiting a friend and packed a small bag. A few changes of clothes, my laptop, the designs I couldn't lose. I took only what I had decided I truly needed. The rest of the house, furniture, art, the shelves of books, stayed but not untouched. I moved slowly, like someone walking through a museum before a closing night. I began in the rooms we had shared the longest. In the bedroom, I folded his shirts and mine into neat piles, then tucked away the letters I'd kept from the early days when we were poor and hopeful. In the kitchen, I opened drawers and removed the little things I had never let go of. A chipped mug from my mother, the wooden spoon he carved for me the first Christmas. I wrapped each item in cloth and placed them in boxes labeled with sharp, clean handwriting. I took down the photos from the mantel. There we were, young and laughing at a lake, at our small apartment with paint on our jeans, at the opening of his first project where we'd celebrated until midnight. I ran my fingers along the glass before sliding each frame into a box, as if touching the past could slow it. For a long moment I held one photo, the one of us on a rainy night, sharing an umbrella, and felt the old ache. Then I set it aside. I walked through every room as if saying goodbye. I stood where we'd had our first fight, remembering the sharp words and the apology that followed. I lingered beside the tree in the yard where he'd proposed, thinking of the way his voice had trembled. Each place had its own memory, some tender, some bitter, all mine. I whispered the dates and small details aloud, cataloging the life we had built together. When I reached the study, I opened the drawers where business papers once gathered dust. I made copies of what mattered and tucked the originals away where no one would think to look. I did not rush. Every motion was careful, clinical even. I wanted no trace of panic, only purpose. Before I left the house that night, I moved through it once more. I paused in the doorway of the living room where the light from the fireplace used to make the walls glow. I traced my hand along the banister, memorizing the grain of the wood. Then I stood in the center of the room, and very softly so the walls themselves would hear, I said the words I had held like a stone. "You said I was dead to you. Now you'll know what that means." I closed the door behind me and walked away into the cooling night, the boxes at my side and a strange, new weight resting in my chest. I parked my car a few blocks away, far enough to be unseen but close enough to watch. The night was still, almost too quiet, the way it always feels before something changes forever. I lit the first match and stepped back, my hand steady. The gasoline sizzled as it met the old wood, and the flames began to spread, hungry and bright. The fire caught quickly. Tongues of orange and yellow licked the walls, consuming curtains, carpets, and the memories embedded in every corner. I stayed in the car, my eyes fixed on the house, watching it ignite under the black sky. The glow reflected on the windows, on the hood of my car, and finally in my own eyes. It wasn't joy I felt, not even satisfaction. It was something heavier, something mournful, a quiet recognition of the life I had lost and the betrayal that had led me here. I dialed 911 with a calm voice, giving the address but nothing else. The dispatcher's words seemed distant, almost like background noise, as if I were already outside the bounds of this world. After the call, I drove off, blending into the night. Atlanta's streets were familiar, yet foreign. The city was moving on, unaware that my life had just pivoted on a single moment. By morning, the news was alive with speculation. "Fire destroys luxury mansion in Buckhead," read the headlines. "Officials suspect electrical fault as cause." Photographs showed charred beams and smoke rising into the dawn sky. No one suspected anything else. No one ever would. I heard about Dorian later, through the news and scattered social media mentions. He had returned to the house the following day, only to be met with ashes, charred remnants of everything he once prized. The artwork he collected, the antiques, even the records for his company, gone. His office, where he kept contracts and investments, reduced to blackened rubble. Within weeks, the effects rippled outward. Missing records meant claims couldn't be filed. Uninsured losses piled up. Clients and partners grew wary. The empire he had carefully built with my support crumbled from within, silent but irreversible. I did not celebrate. I watched from a distance, the calm I had cultivated still resting over me like a cloak. The fire had not been revenge in a burst of anger. It had been precision, a final statement. He had tried to erase me, to claim everything we built as if my contributions never mattered. The flames had reminded him that nothing truly stays under control, that what is built on betrayal and selfishness can be destroyed by someone who sees clearly. I never returned to the house. Its absence was a quiet echo that followed me, a symbol of everything lost and reclaimed. And while the city moved on, unaware of the story behind the blaze, I sat quietly in my new apartment, drinking coffee, staring out at the early morning light, knowing that the world had shifted and nothing Dorian owned could ever hurt me again. The move to Savannah was quiet, almost invisible. I left behind the name Baines, the city I had built my life in, and everything tied to him. Now, I was Amira Mensah again, just a woman with a suitcase, a few boxes, and a determination to breathe freely without fear or deception hanging over me. My new apartment overlooked the water, small and unassuming, but perfect in its simplicity. The salty breeze carried the scent of the ocean, and the seagulls' cries became a kind of music I didn't know I needed. I spent my days working as a freelance interior designer, taking on small projects, a coastal cottage here, a tiny boutique there. Each space I touched reminded me that I could create beauty without anyone else's approval or interference. The mornings were slow and deliberate. I brewed my coffee, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and let the sunlight filter through the blinds. Some days I walked along the shoreline, letting the sand cling to my feet, letting the rhythm of the waves pull away the tension I didn't realize I had carried for years. The past still lingered in quiet ways, in memory and in instinct, but it no longer controlled me. One morning, while flipping through the news online, my heart skipped a little. A headline caught my eye: Atlanta developer under investigation for fraud and tax evasion. I clicked. There was Dorian, looking disheveled in a press photo, papers stacked around him as investigators moved through what remained of his business empire. Zuri's name appeared, too. She had left him weeks ago, tired of the chaos, tired of the man she had wanted to be. I stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the words sink in. There was no satisfaction in smirking, no glee in watching his downfall. It was just closure. The man who had tried to erase me, to humiliate me, to rewrite our shared history, was now facing the consequences of his own actions. The universe, in its quiet way, had restored a balance he never saw coming. I set the laptop aside and walked to the balcony. The waves rolled endlessly, their rhythm steady and unyielding. I could feel the tide pulling away the last traces of tension, of anger, of grief. The wind carried a light salt spray, and I breathed it in slowly, deliberately, letting it fill my lungs with a sense of new beginnings. I sat with my coffee, warm and comforting in my hands, and watched the horizon glow as the sun began its climb. Everything I had lost, everything I had endured, had led to this calm, this freedom, this reclamation of myself. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "Some things have to burn before you can breathe again." And in that moment, I believed it. Months passed in Savannah, each day blending into the next with quiet work and long walks along the shore. I had learned to live in the calm, to savor the small victories of independence, the freedom from manipulation and lies. And then one morning, a message arrived through a mutual contact. Dorian wanted to meet. He said it was urgent. I read the message twice, my fingers resting on the phone. The man who had humiliated me, betrayed me, and tried to erase me from his life was asking for a conversation. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let him remain a shadow in my past. But something inside told me this was the last chapter, the closure I had been waiting for. I agreed cautiously. We chose a small cafe near the water, unassuming and quiet, a place where I could leave if necessary. When I arrived, he was already there, slumped in a chair, the weight of months visible in the lines on his face. He looked nothing like the powerful man he had once been. His suits hung loosely, his hair unkempt, and his eyes held a desperation that made me pause for only a moment. He stood when I approached, fumbling with his hands. "Amira," he said softly, voice breaking. I need to talk." I nodded, sitting across from him, keeping my distance but not turning away. He swallowed hard, looking anywhere but at me. Then, finally, his gaze met mine, filled with shame and defeat. "You destroyed me," he whispered, as if saying it out loud could make it true. I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression calm, unreadable. "No, Dorian," I said slowly, deliberately. "You did that when you decided I was already dead to you." My voice was quiet, but it carried weight, the weight of years of love, patience, and betrayal. He flinched slightly at the words, the truth cutting sharper than any argument or confrontation could. For a moment, he said nothing. His shoulders sagged further, and he stared at the table, utterly defeated. I could feel the finality in the air, the completion of something that had started so long ago with broken promises and cruel words. I stood, collected my bag, and adjusted my coat. There was no anger left in me, no need to lecture, no desire to see him grovel. I had taken care of myself, of my life, and now it was his turn to reckon with his own choices. I walked out of the cafe, leaving him behind in the morning light, his figure slumped and quiet, like a shadow fading into the past. The sun caught the edges of my coat and hair, warm and real, illuminating a world that belonged only to me now. I didn't smile, not yet. Happiness wasn't the point, but freedom was. And as I stepped onto the street, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and possibility, I felt it fully for the first time in years. I was free. Do you think Amira was justified in the way she handled everything with Dorian? Or do you think she could have taken a different path? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your opinion. And if stories like this grab your attention, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one.